Hello and welcome to this week's polling station. You've got me, Kedjanyi, and our good friend Paul Krishnamurty here for what we hope is a jam-packed update across the political betting world with several big stories breaking over the past week. Paul, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Very well, very well. Enjoying the drama this week in Westminster a bit.
Plenty of drama in Westminster, plenty north of the border too, even so, of course, across the Atlantic Sea. But we're going to head to Northern Ireland for our first story of the week, and I think the biggest, by now I'm sure you all know, the Windsor framework, a reworking of Northern Ireland's relationship with the EU. Initially the backstop, then the protocol, now the Windsor framework. And all the signs are admittedly a personal view, but this seems to be a pretty big win for Rishi Sunak, doesn't it, Paul?
I think it's a massive win for it. I think it's a really significant moment. I don't know that it will transform his prospects in the long term, and we'll get onto that. But I think it was a really seismic moment. The fact that they put that deal together so easily after so many years of so-called, phony war, right, which I kind of think was generated mostly from Boris Johnson's team and Circle. And Sunak has, at a stroke, something we would have all said was against the odds 3 months ago, has not only he's going to, this deal will sail through, I'm quite sure about that. But I think that at a stroke, he's transformed Britain's relationship with its close allies. I don't think it's at all too much of a stretch to now think that we now have a good, friendly, productive, cooperative relationship with the EU, right? That many of the problems, boat crossings, the import checks, all of this stuff, I think they can do a deal. This stuff isn't beyond the wit of man, and as long as the EU believe they have a willing partner, I think they'll go with it. I think it will improve our relationship with the United States because there was a huge cloud hanging over Johnson's era. And I think that more sort of broadly, it represents like the defeat of populism. It's a return to serious politics. The whole debate over Northern Ireland, us Twitter addicts, we've spent years and years tearing our hair out some of the ridiculous things, knowingly ridiculous, bad faith things being said about Northern Ireland and the prospects for a deal. Suddenly that thing's all over. And, it just seems like a little faction of Boris Johnson supporters and Nigel Farage and the rest of it. And, look, they've made their careers most of those people have made their careers by being against the EU and complaining. They'll continue to do that. But I just don't think they're going to be mainstream politics anymore. I think that the sensible people, so to speak, and I'm hardly a Rishi Sunak supporter generally, right? But the sensible people have won.
Yeah, I also think it's a really big win for Rishi Sunak, and I would agree. I think it shows the benefit, I think, of engaging basically at a basic level much more with the opposite numbers. And you could tell actually through the way that James Cleverly and Chris Easton-Harris were having these meetings with Marco Sefcovic. They were meeting frequently. They seem to be making a lot of progress. It's quite clear that Sunak and von der Leyen get on, at least on a personal level as well, and all that stuff. Again, we're seeing sort of diplomacy in action. It is a big achievement because most of the problems, and it wasn't just Brexiteers who had problems with the protocol, I'd say about 80% of them at face value appear to have been fixed in one fell swoop. And to do that, and then to get a deal which not only has opposition support, however tactical you might think it is, but also support of the likes of Steve Baker, etc., is not something I think that could have been foreseen, say even 6 months, a year ago. So no, I think it's pretty big. And we'll talk quickly about the prospects and where this might go with the betting market. At the moment, we're still long odds on Labour to win the most seats. 6 is on, 130 the Conservatives. We're now 8-15 for a Labour majority, 2-1 for a hung Parliament, 15-2 for the Tory majority. Sunak's received a little bit of a bump, it seems, in favourability, and there's going to be more polling done over the next couple of weeks as we traditionally expect. Do you think this does? I mean, what do you think this does for his prospects? Obviously, he's going to get an initial bounce. It's some good mood music. Could this be the beginning of something better for him?
Well, point one, I think that he is pretty much safe now for this year, and you have to think it's going to be harder to remove him. I think it blows Boris Johnson out the water. So I think Sunak is pretty solid now as leader of the election. That's one thing. I think that he is certainly in a better place with the country than the Conservative Party are. And that has to be a positive moving forward for him. What I would wonder about is that, us politicos are all over this Northern Ireland deal. We don't get the importance of it, even if you're against it. We get the importance of it, right? It's a big story. I wonder how much this cuts through to the wider public, especially when you've got a story like Matt Hancock's texts competing for that bandwidth. And so I wonder if there's not that much of an immediate bounce. But I do think more generally, it just helps them rebrand as being the party of competence, the party that can solve problems, right? And Starmer's done a great deal, I think, to make Labour look more serious. And that's where the conversation is going. Now, I'm not saying it can save turn it around completely, but I think we all agree that the polls of late have been ridiculously one-sided, unrealistically one-sided, and general elections always are bound to bounce back a bit. I do think it calls the Labour majority into question very much because, as we discussed before, it's a huge ask. Winning that amount of seats, especially in places where they've never won before and where, it would take a Herculean effort. And of course, with voter ID law coming in, which will hurt Labour, and fighting against incumbents, that's, the incumbents generally get a little bounce. So asking Labour to win that many seats is, I think, quite a tall order still. But at the same time, I just can't see the Tories maintaining their majority, not without Brexit on the ballot, without Corbyn on the ballot, with living standards so poor. And that isn't going to improve. I mean, ultimately, the politics in the next year is probably going to be more defined by energy bills, council tax bills, mortgage interest rates.
Yeah, I would agree with the fundamentals there. I think the branding of this will be important, and I do think there will be. I think there will be cut through. I do think there will be cut through. The sheer amount of media attention it's received will put it in people's minds, especially how broadcast it's received. But going forward, I think those other problems are the more difficult ones to fix. I can see a possible route to Tory improvement in polls, but my issue would be this can't be in the news forever. And when things settle down, I don't yet see what the sort of positive thing Sunak has in terms of mood music to keep that forward momentum going. In fact, there might possibly even be a regression, admittedly with crystal ball forecasting a little bit here. But I think the road ahead is still very long. However, that said, it's bought him some time and bought him some space, I think, both of which he really did need. Speaking of time and space, there's not an awful lot of it in the SNP leadership race, which appears to be a head-to-head battle, according to our betting market, between Humza Yousaf, 4-5 at the time of recording, and 11-10 second favourite Kate Forbes. Ash Reagan is 14-1. I think it's fair to say none of us agreed it'd been a great start for Kate Forbes to this leadership race, but her underlying numbers appear to remain reasonably strong, at least with the voters. Your thoughts, Paul?
Personally, I've backed Humza Yousaf. I appreciate that Kate Forbes has better numbers with a wider public, but these aren't SNP members. And whilst I am not an expert on the SNP membership at all, and so take my opinion with a pinch of salt, I just look at the number of endorsements that Humza Yousaf has, which dwarf the other two. and who those people are, and the fact that Sturgeon and Keith Brown almost certainly are backing Yousaf, even if they can't say, and the fact that surely SNP members who knock on doors realise that having a leader with the views on social views of Kate Forbes will destroy their party. It will destroy their movement, which is largely young, very liberal. You know, whether true or not, a lot of people see it as the most left-wing party in Scotland. Well, what percentage of people on the left have any truck with Kate Forbes' social views? And these sorts of things, you know, maybe it isn't as important as independence, right? And she does have the right to those opinions, but I just think it's political suicide for a party of the left or the liberal left to go there. And I just assume, maybe wrongly, that the members, especially given the lead of the endorsements of far more of their representatives, will go with Yousaf for that reason.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you on this. I think also Yousaf having the endorsement, or not the endorsement of Sturgeon, but basically being seen as close to Sturgeon here, is not going to be any bad thing for him. You know, she was very much the glue holding that coalition together. I think his endorsements will be a help, especially in terms of bringing firepower to the campaign trail. And I think also the Forbes views standpoint, or her views, in a way provide a nice counterbalance to the record or the criticism he'll face over his time as health secretary. You know, I had believed, and I still do, I think that will cause him a lot of problems down the line should he become first minister. But in this race, there is a counterbalance for SNP members to think about. Oh, we can't appoint this guy who's terrible as health secretary. Well, we can't appoint the person who said they'd have voted against gay marriage. We can't appoint the person who is seen to have views that will be at least at odds, we know, with Scottish voters more generally. So I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to see more and more flip-flops. I think we're only at the beginning still. And I think the first TV debate, I think the only one on STV on the 7th of March, will be a pretty big trading opportunity. But I also just favour Humza Yousaf at this point in time too. Also interesting, we haven't yet had any SNP member polling. We've had polling of Scottish voters, polling of SNP voters more widely. That SNP group can be a pretty big and unwieldy one. It'd be interesting to see if anybody's looking at what SNP members at the moment are thinking. Speaking of thinking, across to the US, because many are thinking differently about the GOP race. Yes, it's already a race to be the GOP candidate, presumably takes on President Biden. More on him later, because we've had a bit of a flip-flop in the betting. With President Trump, former President Trump, getting a boost from 4 new polls. One survey even had him hitting 50%, Emerson College, that poll came from. And now he's 5-6 with Star Sports to be the Republican nominee, and he's joint 3-1 second favourite with Ron DeSantis to be the next president. Your thoughts, Paul?
Well, this is, I think, assuming that DeSantis runs, and it does sound that way, it sounds like people are whispering in journalists' ears and everybody knows that he's running and so is Joe Biden, right? So the betting is correct in that way. Assuming that is the case, I think this is going to be an enormous betting heat, Trump v DeSantis. It will absolutely capture the imagination. We've got a first debate date for August in Milwaukee. So, you know, it's going to be a proper primary, the thing that we didn't get in 2020. Look, I appreciate Trump's polls are good, national polls, right? I understand that. And I understand that that's driving the market. Personally, I don't think that at this stage in the game, we should pay very much attention to that. He is a former president. He is, you know, a colossus in the conservative movement, right? He's the most recognisable man on the planet. Now, if only 46% of his party membership actually are prepared to say, I want this man to be president. I think that's a poor poll. I think that's a very disappointing poll. And I think when you compare where DeSantis is to other state governors or other or non basically presidents or vice presidents, he's doing fantastically. He's polling amazingly, and you would expect him in places like New Hampshire or whatever to be polling miles behind, but he's not. Also, big event this big weekend, which kind of crystallizes what this divide is in the Republican Party is going to be. You've got two events. You've got CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, which frankly is the complete and utter pro-Russia far right, who last year, for example, they literally had a banner behind them saying, we are domestic terrorists. And they had a fake January 6th prisoner locked in a cage with an orange jumpsuit on. It's properly balmy. Trump will be there, right? DeSantis won't. DeSantis has swerved that. Rather than be associated with Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and co, he's going to a Club for Growth event. And the Club for Growth is historically the big kind of power players in the Republican Party, the donors, the donor class. It's not just, it's the GOP establishment, which I know Trump likes to sort of go up against, and he has a narrative with that. But a lot of these people supported Trump in 2016. They don't now. The Koch brothers have said clearly they are going to unite around one candidate, and I think that is the general mindset against all of the non-Trump sections of the party, and it's clear who that's going to be. DeSantis is so far ahead of anybody else. It's going to be really, really hard. The only way someone else comes into this, Haley, Pence, Pompeo, is if Trump gets taken out somewhere. Trump gets arrested, gets indicted, pulls out because he doesn't fancy losing, and suddenly the race becomes more open. But as it stands, it's going to be a head-to-head, and I think DeSantis will win. I think that I certainly wouldn't take 5 to 6 Trump with free money.
I agree that Trump's become too short. I don't have a particularly strong opinion in that field, although I do think it's likely to become a 2-horse race fairly quickly, because the moment DeSantis enters, I don't think anybody else is going to fancy trying to get any sort of attention in that race. Basically, there'll be no more attention to divide between Trump and DeSantis, and we're already seeing Nikki Haley sort of suffering with that. DeSantis hasn't even run yet. I think the prices currently are probably a bit too tilted in favor of Trump. I agree. When DeSantis runs, I'd expect more attention, maybe even a boost as the establishment sort of centers around him, particularly some powerful media organizations. And it'll be a really interesting stress test of where the GOP voter is. But DeSantis has done plenty of work, I think, in making himself appealable to that sort of person, and you see that in Florida. Speaking of big players, there's no bigger player than the current president, Joe Biden, who reportedly is really close to running apparently now. I mean, do you have it as understanding basically that he runs like I do? Is that what you're hearing very much?
Absolutely. And I just think we've reached a point now where these prominent political journalists are being told stuff, and Biden's going to declare, I think, within a month, maybe 6 weeks, and DeSantis will go in probably May, June. I think that Biden remains the bet at the moment, simply because he's going to declare, and those odds have to shorten up. Especially if he could well be, especially if the market is saying that Trump is the likeliest opponent. Well, I'm sure Biden is not more than even money against Trump, surely, in a head-to-head. I do not see how Trump could be odds on in that race. So there's plenty of mileage in backing Biden. You mentioned before media organizations. Again, this is critical. Fox News are clearly not coming out for Trump. They're out for DeSantis. And I just think that if they had done that at any point in the last 7 years, then Trump wouldn't have got anywhere. You know, he needs it. The Murdoch media machine, particularly Fox News, know how to destroy candidates. They know that better than anybody. They will find a weakness and play on it. And Trump's got plenty of weaknesses that media has chosen not to focus on. You know, if he's indicted, which I'm very confident he will be, I think that's that.
Yeah, I would agree with this. I think if you have to have a strategy right now, it would be backing Biden to be the next nominee. I know he's 4-9 now, and some people will say that's a very short price. It's a very short price bet, but that 4-9 will go. It will go much shorter when he eventually does, as I believe he will do. And I think that's a much easier task than winning the White House. Not that I don't think he's capable of it, but it's a much easier task, particularly if, say, he goes up against DeSantis, which is a different matchup, much more unknown. And I also would agree. I think he's 9-4 with us. I still think it's fair. I still think it's very fair. In terms of his underlying fundamentals, his approvals are good. They're strong. There's a lot of talk about age or whatever, but it's mostly a number thing. Biden is perfectly healthy. He's been gaff-free for a little while now, and also most of these occasional sippers or whatever, they're overhyped for a day or two in my experience, and then everybody moves on to the next thing. You know, if there was something terrible to do that would bring down the presidency, I think he'd have done it by now. And actually, I think compared to previous expectations, it's gone very well. So no, I would be in agreement on those points. I think we'll see lots of changes in that market, though, particularly as we get more and more polling. And I don't think we'll see a Democratic primary at all. Anything else that you're looking out for over the next couple of weeks? These stories have all got sure to develop more, but there are always things on the horizon.
No, I mean, really, obviously, America is always in my mind. I check that market several times a day. Yeah. But I'm at this point, I am mostly interested in where this Tory Labour split goes. I've never been convinced that Labour's lead is rock solid. I don't think it's down to anything they have done. There are plenty of weaknesses there. And, you know, the next thing could be help with energy bills, right? It'll be popular. And again, it's like furlough, almost, you know, now, given what's happened in recent years, the Northern Ireland thing, it's Sunak not behaving like people expect the Tories to behave, right? And when you do something else, people listen. And that's what, you know, that's why he has a better rating than the rest of the parties, because something like furlough, that people giving money away is not something people instinctively associate with the Tories. There he did, and it made him that much more popular. And I think that having massively gaining gravitas, giving him something to define himself and not look like a lightweight as he did, I think they could go from strength to strength.
Interesting. I mean, I think the budget will be really important in all sorts of ways. The government's had good news on wholesale. The news is much better, I think, than people feared to be the case last winter. But it remains to be seen where the intervention comes, when it comes, and what the real terms difference is. I think it will go quite a long way to any sort of recovery. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me this week, Paul, as ever.
Pleasure as always.
And we'll be back next week. Thank you very much for watching the polling station and listening and getting in touch. And don't forget to check out lots of our other great content on the YouTube channel and the content site as well. Until next week, bye-bye.